instead of just focusing on the time saving of repairing that fence or the capital of building another mile of fence, let's think about it as we have an unlimited fencing budget. Our ranch is essentially a blank canvas again.
Well, today we're taking a straightforward look at virtual fencing, what it actually does, how it works on real ranches, and where it may or may not fit in your operation. Now, this isn't about promoting anything, just understanding the technology so that you and I can make our call on whether it works or not. Theo Beaumont from Halter will be joining us, and we'll also have Dallas Mount with Ranch Management Consultants adding to the conversation.
I think the day-to-day activities we do on a ranch are going to look very different in just a few years.
Then we'll switch gears and visit with Paige Wheeler from Ambrook as we talk about year-end bookkeeping, how to evaluate your process, eliminate redundancy, and make sure your numbers are truly working for you. It's all ahead on today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Good to have you with us on our program today. And as you heard there in the opening, we're going to be having some great conversation on topics that are very relevant for us in the ranching industry. Virtual fencing, I think, comes up in about every conversation these days, so we'll be talking on that. And then, of course, bookkeeping, it's that time of the year, so Paige Wheeler from Ambrook will be with us for that conversation. Also, kind of a special addition to today's program is the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in just a few moments for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and it will be on a subject that I believe will resonate with a lot of us, so we'll get to that in just a few moments. And later on in the show, meteorologist Don Day will be in as we take a look at our long-range weather. Hey, just real quick, and that is if you do not have a subscription to Working Ranch Magazine, you can get one started today by going to workingranchmag.com, or you can also stop by your local Tractor Supply store and pick one up right there off the shelf. Well, as I said just a moment ago, the Captain Tim O'Byrne, editor of Working Ranch Magazine, is in this week. So here's the Captain Tim O'Byrne with this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. Today's Tim's 2 Cents is a special message to President Trump and Treasury Secretary Bessent. Gentlemen, with all due respect, anytime a presser comes across your desk or you hear somebody mention the word beef, cattle, steaks, hamburger, and screwworm, anything like that, I want you to call 702-566-1456 and leave a message for me, and I will walk you through it, since it appears nobody else is doing that. Pro bono. And how am I qualified? Well, I've been the editor of Working Ranch Magazine for the past 20 years. I have 20 years of big outfit cowboy and feedlot experience. I've written 2 books on beef production, and I've been designated expert witness in over 85 cases in the last 22 years in livestock-related litigation. Again, if you hear the word beef or anything like it, call me, 702-566-1456. My phone line is open 24/7. Back to you in the booth, Justin.
All right, Captain, thanks for that. And folks, I don't know if you're like me. I think what the Captain said there speaks for a lot of us. I know for myself, I'm just kind of tired of seeing any more social posts come out and what's going to happen next in the marketplace. I just would, like the Captain said, just appreciate a phone call before they get too far carried away on some of this kind of stuff, because it just seems maybe some explanation about the beef industry could be helpful to what's going on back there, as I'm sure most of you feel that way as well. Well, stick with us. When we come back, we're going to be talking virtual fence. It's the first part of our conversation. We're going to start that here today. We'll finish up in next week's episode for the second half of that, but stick around. We're getting into that coming up next. In a world of variables that are beyond our control, there is a tool that can provide certainty for your breeding program. I'm talking about Identity Beef. It's the first genomic profile designed for crossbred commercial cattle. Now, here's a tool that's going to utilize DNA to rank the genetic merit for 17 key traits, from maternal to performance to carcass traits, as well as mitigate risk factors, for example, like congestive heart failure. It's time to take the gamble and the waiting game out of your breeding program. Make accurate decisions with confidence and uncover your herd's potential with Identity Beef. To learn more, contact your Neogen representative today or visit neogen.com/identity-beef. And joining us now here on the Working Ranch Radio Show is Theo Beaumont, who is the head of partnerships for Halter Dallas Mountain, who is the CEO and owner of Ranch Management Consultants. And guys, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, I think there's probably not, maybe even a day, but definitely not a week that goes by that we don't see, whether it's in our social media feeds or in our own emails that are coming in, the technology that we are seeing that's in our industry, and it continues to evolve. As we were talking before we went on air, Dallas was mentioning the fact that we're seeing just the rate of change in technology is just really going extremely fast. Virtual fencing, Theo, as you were with Halter, virtual fencing probably almost at the top of the list in this, and it really has since the very first interview I did regarding virtual fencing, which was probably 5-6 years ago. The concept is similar, but the technology just continues to go there and really becoming a viable aspect for us to look at in our industry.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting. Halter's about 8 years old now, and even just seeing the change in terms of market perception and how much the product has evolved, over those 8 years has been absolutely wild to see. And a lot of that has really just been driven off our users on the ground. The feedback loops we get, how we apply that. At the end of the day, virtual fencing is a tool, and it's a tool that can continuously evolve. And I think the US market in particular for us, it just seems so positive and a really exciting space for us to be in as a company.
Theo, as you had said, it's about 8 years ago is when things kind of got started. But at the same time, through that eight-year period, can you think back to some key points that just really seemed like the concept or that technology really just kind of started to catch a cog with producers, with ranchers out there? And they're like, hey, because as a company, you guys had to believe in your product long ago or else you wouldn't have got even started up. So when it really became that point for ranchers, can you point to one or two things that really started to that was the catch, that made sense for a rancher?
Yeah, one or two things. That's actually a great question. I think, the first 4 years with us, we were just trying to make it work. So there was basically just 4 years of straight R&D. There's one thing that really stood out for me. I think when we first started rolling out commercially in New Zealand, a lot of the focus was on time and labor. And I don't think that was wrong or inaccurate, because I think that is so important for people who are using virtual fencing. The most pivotal moment that I can remember is when we started thinking about it not as a tool to replace the fences that we had or replace the labor that was going out and rolling out, that polywire, particularly in New Zealand. It was thinking about it as a unlimited fencing budget and shifting that narrative to say, hey, instead of just focusing on the time saving of repairing that fence or the capital of building another mile of fence, let's think about it as we have an unlimited fencing budget. Our ranch is essentially a blank canvas again. Mm-hmm. We're kind of rethinking what we would do from a grazing management and a land management perspective if we had an unlimited fencing budget. And when we started to think that way, aligning it with what the ranchers and farmers were trying to achieve and their long-term goals, that's when we saw that real flip in terms of how people were thinking about virtual fencing. And I think that, has really held true till today, and a really important narrative that we have to continue to sort of voice to people out there.
Yeah, and as you said that, I was just thinking that's not any different than where we're at right now. That's really what folks are looking at this for is grazing management, land management. And I think, is there anything of this coinciding with probably the next generation of producers that are moving into ranching operations. I mean, it's not all happening at the same time, but as those folks are moving into back on the places, and like for example, even in our situation, I've been back a while, but I mean, I've got fences here that have been around for a long, long time. And when I start looking at, okay, do you change those out or do you look at going some different options? Some of that's kind of happening. It's not just a big old mass happening, but it's just kind of happening across the country. Do you see that?
Certainly see that. And it's interesting. We don't tend to see like a really targeted demographic of people who are interested in halter. There's all examples, right? You've got kids who are coming back to the ranch. You've got, granddad who's been there his entire life. But I do think that a lot of people are now looking at the burden of capital investment of fencing as a real concern. If you've got 40 miles of fencing on your ranch that at some point will need replacing, that is a genuine and I think super valid concern and fear in terms of what that would mean from an investment point of view, and where else could that money be used. So we're certainly seeing that. In the US, that's been particularly evident.
Yeah. Dallas, real quick, and I know you said initially, it's like, I just kind of want to be on the outside of the conversation here a little bit, but I want to bring you in on this because you made a good point, and I brought it up at the very beginning of our conversation here. And the fact that the rate of change in technology, and that kind of alludes to my comment about just every day or every week we're seeing in our social media posts or our emails, technologies that's just becoming really very integrated in our industry. And that rate of change is sometimes, I think, for producers, we feel like, golly, this feels like a fire hose. And how do we sort through this? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I appreciate how you opened it, Justin, talking about the conversations that we're having. And I don't sit down with a group of ranchers for more than 5 minutes before this conversation starts to happen, right? Around whether it's virtual fence, whether it's other, AI, other technologies that we're talking about in the ranching space. It kind of started a few years ago when Grandpa put the camera in the calving barn, and that feels like it kind of opened the window to all these other ways to use these tools in our ranching. I think the day-to-day activities we do on a ranch are going to look very different in just a few years, and I've been involved in this for now going on 3 decades, and I don't know a rate of change that has happened as fast as what we're seeing happen in that time I've been involved. So this is really interesting stuff, and it's making us rethink a lot of our, wasn't too long ago, somebody'd walk in the door and we'd sit down and we'd take a ranch and lay out the watering points and start talking about, okay, where does it make sense to cross fence? And, what are those kind of conversations? And we're still talking about water, of course. Mm-hmm. Water is fundamental, but we're rethinking all those conversations around spending $100,000 on a ranch cross fencing probably doesn't make sense anymore. So how do we rethink that, right? And these tools that can be implemented. It's changing the game. We need to be paying attention to it.
Yeah. Theo, I want to go back to you because when we start talking about this is change. This is something new. And how have you guys addressed, I think one of the elements that causes people to be a little resistant to change or hesitant is that it's risky. They see it as a risk because it is something different. How has that evolved? How is that conversation of being maybe less risk averse to this type of technology than they were 4 years, 5 years ago?
Yeah, it's a great question. And certainly we have seen that progress. I remember distinctly, the first 20 producers that we brought on in New Zealand. Heck, I don't know what their neighbors thought, but it was some pretty out there conversations. I think there's a few parts to it. I think one does just come with a bit of scale. We've got just about 750,000 collars on cows right now. That is helpful in terms of people being able to relate to it, see how other people are using it, take a bit of confidence from that they're not, the very first person on that bus, which I think is great. Part two is really just being thoughtful around the narrative on virtual fencing. It is a change. It is different. But, it's interesting when you just sort of really get down into the conversation with a rancher and you just talk about fence, inherently there are risks with building fence because there's no flexibility to it. If you build a fence up that particular ridge, well, that's you for 50 years. It doesn't allow for any change with weather, climate, carrying capacity, how you want to graze, your water sources, all of that sort of element. So it's been interesting when, we've really worked on that narrative of comparing the two together and working through that sort of concern, which I think is super valid. And I think it probably pairs with other concerns around, what does this technology mean for our day-to-day operations? What might it mean from, a stockmanship side of things? All of that sort of stuff comes up all the time. And I think it's really important that it does come up and that we actually do take the time to talk about it carefully and thoughtfully and make sure we're hearing, different opinions and thoughts on those topics.
Mm-hmm. Dallas, I want to go to you on this next one when we talk about change, because I think one of the concerns a little bit is that people may struggle with accepting new technology is leaving our heritage behind us when we do that. I feel, to me, I'm open to new technology. I've always been that way, but at the same time, I'm wondering, that's a struggle, whether it's valid or not in my mind. It's just that as ranchers, how we've done things 50 years ago. Now, I don't say that badly. I just say that there's certain practices that we do that were done back when cattle were first in the country. I mean, that's just because we raise cows. That's the way it is. Okay, there's anything different about that. But I think sometimes when we add some of this newer technology, we look at this, especially this one, I think there's some concern about, man, we're going to leave our heritage behind us.
Yeah, I think it's important consideration. What I think about is it is kind of a timeline, a mark on a piece of paper on the left side and on the right side. On one side of that line is tradition, and the other side of that line is innovation. Right. So you're managing that paradox for your business about where are you going to fall on this. Right. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't do one without the other. Right. How do we appreciate the traditions that were founded on our values, those things, but also how do we be open to those innovations that are going to improve our lives, that are going to keep our business relevant? If I'm just going to lock into that traditional mindset and say, I'm never going to do anything different than I've ever done. Right. At some point, the business will be left behind. Right. So it just depends on where you fall on that scale. Obviously, I'm not saying abandon all those traditions that we hold valuable. But at the same time, if we're not considering what innovations are appropriate for me and my business and to help me stay relevant and move forward, I think we're giving up a huge opportunity. So I'm not sure this is the right one for everybody, but I think we need to be cognizant about what are these innovations that I am willing to adapt. You talked about Theo's light bulb moment, Justin, but the one for me was going and seeing this in operation on a scaled ranch. And the reason I want to bring this up, this is a very a ranch that appreciates tradition, right? This is big cowboys, big hats, great stockmanship. Mm-hmm. These are people who do that. And as they were using on this ranch, it was halter that they were using, the excitement of the next generation about what they can do with this tool was palpable. You could see these young people that were engaged, that were saying, man, can you think of what we can do with this and what we can do with that, right? And the leader of this business stepped back and he said, at the very end of our conversation, the comment he made was, the best thing this has brought, look at the energy, look at the excitement of that group right there. And that's what he pointed to. So, I mean, if I'm not going to fault a ranch for appreciating those traditions, but if we dig into those traditions so far, that the next generation, the people we want to be involved in these ranches come back and they're like, there's no opportunity to do anything different here. I'm going to go find something else to do. I'd be on board with them.
Right? Yeah. Boy, that's a good point, because I think, as you said, if that, nothing against tradition, but if the younger generation or the next generation doesn't see some real something to grasp onto that makes them excited, no wonder we have a hard time getting son or daughter back to the ranch, isn't it? Dallas, you had made a comment. I think we're going to take a break here, but it's a good segue. You said, maybe it's not for everyone. Well, let's talk about that in the next segment. Theo, Dallas, I want to get into this. Theo, I'll have you probably do most of this. I want to know kind of how this is going to work, because I think for us to then make that determination of whether it fits or whether it doesn't is a matter of let's get to the nitty-gritty details of how this works, because I think that will help folks then move to the next step in this. So we'll do that when we come back after the break.
Hey everybody, Tim here. We're fixing to come up on 1 million downloads of our Working Ranch radio show podcast, which is really exciting. And it got me to thinking about another viral moment that we had back in 2017 when we ran a short Facebook video of the Safety Zone calf catchers. And it was so popular, it got 6.8 million views in the first 5 days. I want you folks to check it out, Safety Zone calf catchers. It's a great product for all producers. Keep you safe when you're working with baby calves, especially for old timers like me who maybe can't outrun those cows anymore. Check them out, Safety Zone Calf Catchers.
Calving season is a favorite time of year, but along with that special time are dangers, extra stress, and increased labor. Safety Zone Calf Catchers are all about safety and making processing new calves easier. Designed for ATVs or UTVs, one person can do the job and never be threatened by the protective mother cow. Make this and every calving season safer and easier with a Safety Zone Calf Catcher. Watch videos and customer testimonials or order yours today at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914. Affordable and made in the USA. Make your upcoming and all future calving seasons safer, easier, and stress-free. Durable and designed to work anywhere you can drive your ATV or UTV. Order online at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914 today.
All right, Theo, I want to go with you now because I think we need to probably have a little bit more definition of how this is working. I mean, from a very 10,000 or 30,000 foot level, I think everybody understands what we're talking about. But let's kind of get into the nitty gritty on this and how this works, because I think then that will lend itself to the conversation later about where we can get that ROI on this, which I think is fundamental at the bottom. At the end of the day, that's what we're trying to get to. So let's start from ground zero. You know, I'm sitting across the table from you. I got my cup of coffee in the hand. I'm a rancher. I'm weighing out some options here. Let's start from there.
Yeah, I liked how you approach that, Justin. I think to have a really clear understanding of how this collar is working with this individual cow, super, super important. And I agree with you. I think at a 50,000 foot view, we all have a pretty good idea of what it does, you know, as a concept. What does it look like in reality? And so this might require a bit of imagination from everyone listening, but essentially every cow has a collar. It's this GPS-enabled solar-powered collar. Key emphasis there on the solar. Once they go on, they never have to come off. There's no batteries to replace. The solar keeps it charged indefinitely. And a nice note for anyone listening if they're concerned about, you know, bad weather, cold. New Zealand, where we were built and designed and where I'm from, we get about 40 times less sunlight in a year than Colorado does. So fortunately for us, you know, solar is a long way down the list of things that we're ever worried about. So solar powered, goes on the cow, stays on the cow. Solar is great because it gives you unlimited battery life to do a whole lot of things. And in this case, it's really the virtual fencing component. And so the primary function of the collar is to contain cattle, but then also to move them as well. And to do those things, we use three distinctive, you know, aspects of the collar. We have a vibration, we have sound, and then we have this low energy electric pulse. So three distinctive things, and we use them in slightly different ways. So that first objective that we're trying to achieve, which is contain cows. And, you know, we've nearly 750,000 cows collared, as I mentioned. Our containment rate is well over 99%. Okay. We contain cows. We've got really good at it over the years. And it wasn't always easy, but we figured it out. So imagine everyone has a collar on right now, okay? And you're a cow. And imagine there's a virtual fence a foot in front of you, quite literally a foot, that you've drawn on the app on your phone. Now, take a step over that line, okay? What you're going to be getting is that cow is sound. We beep the cows on their right side to turn them left. We beep them on their left side to turn them right. Okay, so we're moving that cow away, just like pushing a cow left or right. We're moving her away from where she's not meant to be, back to the area she is meant to be. And that only happens when she puts her head over that virtual fence. The accuracy of the fences is down to inches, so very, very precise. As she continues to stay out, that sound is going to be ramping. A little bit like, you know, a truck backing into a brick wall. Similar principle. It's letting the cow know that she's not where she's meant to be and she needs to hurry up and move away from that area. And that sound is guiding her, making sure she understands where she is in relation to the virtual fence. If she continues to stay out for, let's just say, 15 seconds for argument's sake, that's when she's going to get this low energy electric pulse to say, right, hurry up, get out of here, okay? But that's really important that she understands the sound is all that preemptive warning, and she knows that if she ignores it, she's going to get this other response from the collar. And so that directional piece has always been really important to us. I guess the logic is for a cow to trust the collar, it needs to be really predictable, really consistent, and really accurate. So that's what we've tried to be. The second piece is the movement of cows. So if everyone imagines a 1,000-acre pasture And let's just, for argument's sake, again, say you've got a beautiful central watering point and you would love to chop that up into quarters. So you've got 4 250 acre pastures. Well, let's say you did that with the virtual fencing, right? And you were grazing that top left-hand segment of that 1,000 acres. And then you knew that by tomorrow morning, mid-morning, they'll have cleaned it up pretty good, okay? And you're like right on the verge of that really good residuals. You haven't overgrazed it, and you want to move them on to that top right-hand segment. You can pre-schedule that on the app on your phone and say, all of you cows, I want you to shift into this next segment at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. When 10 a.m. comes around, all of those cows are getting this vibration, just like your phone vibrating with a text. They're going to get that vibration when their head is facing in the direction that they need to be walking towards. So essentially what will happen is that collar will guide all of those cows out of that first quarter into that next one, and then it will close off behind them. So essentially it will just allow you to rotationally graze or move those cows as much as you want within that pasture. And look, whether that's once a day, whether that's once a week, completely up to the rancher's discretion, what your feed's doing, what your animal requirements are, but it gives you those options. And I think, that's the best way to sort of understand how it's working with those cows on an individual level. The final piece is that it adapts individually to cows. If someone listening pretends they're a brand new heifer and you're grazing your cattle quite tightly, they get bumped out by an older cow, the collar automatically in the background will recognize, hey, this is the first time you've stepped over the line. That heifer's grace period is automatically higher, and the energy of her pulse is the lowest it can be. Versus if someone else is listening and they know that if they were a cow, they'd be a fence jumper, okay? They step over that line, the collar in the background is going to be like, whoa, third time this week, steady on. Your grace period is going to be a lot lower, and the energy of your pulse is going to be on the higher end of what it could be. So in the background, it's always adapting to that each cow's individual behavior, because it is important that we recognize cows are individual, even though we move them as a group.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Now, I want to go back through some of those 3 areas that you talked about: containment, movement, and individual cows. Real quick on the containment part, just a question I had on this from a physical standpoint is there's no issues with the direction of going the wrong direction because of where it's at on the neck or anything like that?
Yeah, it's a totally fair question. So what will happen with the collar is, because it's placed behind the ears on the neck, the sound will effectively be shooting up towards each ear. And what we see is actually the cows will move forwards, but they'll move towards where their head's going, just like pushing a cow left or right. So you'll see a cow step over the virtual fence, you'll see her get those beeps in her right side, and you'll see her do this almost like a little semicircle back into the area she's meant to be. It's a delicate balance because you want the cows to be able to graze right up to that virtual fence, to within inches, but you also want them to respect it. So it was this really interesting sort of dynamic that we've had to work on, all these years to be able to ensure that the cows can do both those things.
Okay. All right. Next question would be in regard to movement. And that is, here's an example. I put bulls out with the cows. I want to pull bulls. Can I pull bulls out with this?
Bulls is a fair one. And if I had $1 for every time I had this question, look, we don't tend to collar breeding bulls. It's not because we can't contain them. We do a lot of yearling bull systems in New Zealand. It's really just necks bigger than heads.
Yeah.
Collars are pretty good at coming off. The bulls are pretty good at staying with the cows anyway, but in terms of, individually pulling bulls, that's probably still going to be a manual job.
Okay, then let me go the other way. Let's not focus on the bull side of it. I mean, I get that. I think everybody understands, a bull that's older than a couple years old is probably going to have a neck that's way bigger. What about the fact that let's say I stick, especially these guys that are into the embryo stuff and the AI and stuff, and they initially stick a bunch of cows out, but then they want to start to say, okay, this 30 head needs to go. We want to pull them out. So we can can we take that, say 100 head or 200 head and start to pull certain cows out of that and go a certain way with each of the different sets that we might want to then go out, physically gather and put with another bull?
Yeah, it's a fair question. We've seen some really cool examples of very similar management with calving in terms of people using halter to effectively do a sandhills calving. We haven't seen it so commonly in sort of the breed up sort of space. I think there's probably elements and things you could try there and work through. My general rule of thumb is if you couldn't do it manually, if cows wouldn't respond to you manually doing it on horseback, you're probably going a little bit too far against just natural cow behavior. So that's always my suggestion to ranchers, just as a bit of a sense check before they try something.
Yeah. Dallas, you're kind of nodding. Is that a realistic ask about something like that? I mean, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think sometimes our existing paradigms limit what our thoughts are around what this new thing can do. But just thinking about our cows this summer, it's about an hour of dirt road to get to where our cows are in the summertime. It's quite an event to get up there, right? And you're going to hook up the pickup, take a couple horses with you, right? Whatever the event is going to be. We had 40 cows go north into a neighbor's this year. And by the time we realized they were gone, got the call, went to go get them, right? It ended up being a full day deal to go find them, get them gathered, walk them back in, go back, make sure we had everything, right? So even probably more than a day. It was a day for me and hired help for the summer. Probably would have been 2 full days of time. So what about just having like that geofence alert of, okay, here's my perimeter boundary. I have collared cows that crossed that, right? So now all of a sudden I'm notified immediately, hey, you got some cattle headed into the neighbors. And then, Theo, could I use the technology to actually turn them and point them back to home as long as my collar's communicating?
Yeah, and I think if you took it back to first principles, it's pretty likely that, you're going to have a virtual fence on all sides, right? Which is great because you might be reinforcing that boundary fencing or that area is really needing a repair in the next couple of years. And so if you take it back to first principles, our expectation is that, that containment rate is pretty much perfect. So I guess by default, you just eliminate that from happening, which is awesome. But I agree with your point. I think there's so many areas in virtual fencing that it's hard to even think about because it's so different from what we'd be used to. Like even as simple as the collars have lights on them, right? And so one of the coolest examples I've seen and what tends to be our rancher's favorite is, you're pulling cattle into the corrals. You've got 50 out of 500 you want to draft out. Well, just have their lights turned on. Really simple. And, that might only save you half an hour, but you know what? That's probably the half an hour that annoys you the most out of your day. And so it's really cool seeing all the different ways our ranchers are using the product. And in many cases, it's quite different to what I think they anticipated before they put collars on, which I think is a really important journey for people to go through. And the sandhills calving was a totally driven by ranchers in the US. We hadn't seen that before we started deploying on properties over here.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to put a pause in our conversation for this week's episode with Theo Beaumont with Halter. Of course, Dallas Mount also sitting here on the side with us in this conversation as we're going to pick up from where we left off, talking more about virtual fencing, getting into more questions that I know, if you're like me, and most of you are probably ranchers as well, have a lot of questions. How does this work in different types of terrain? How does it work with training cows? Some different scenarios how could we use that? Also, of course, the big thing is the investment, the cost, the economic perspective on all of this, and how do we recognize that ROI? Is this for everyone? Maybe it is, maybe isn't, but I think next week's conversation will continue to answer that question for you. So be sure to tune in next week as we will continue this conversation. And by the way, in the meantime, if you want to, you can go to the website at halterhq.com to find out more information. Well, stay with us. When we come back, Paige Wheeler with Ambrook will be joining us. Yeah, it's the time of the year where we need to get these books kind of reconciled, put together. And of course, it's going to start right off the bat with what kind of books you're keeping. And we're going to talk with Paige about that. So be sure to tune in coming up on this next segment.
Molly Manufacturing's all-purpose corral is perfect for any farming operation. With over 3,200 square feet of heavy-duty paneling, the all-purpose corral is the ultimate farm and ranch tool for livestock of any size. It's the industry standard in low-stress livestock handling and safety. One corral, endless possibilities. The all-purpose corral from Molly is better by design. Find out more at mollymfg.com.
And joining us now here on the Working Ranch Radio Show is Paige Weiler. She's the head of customer success for Ambrook. And Paige, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thanks, Justin. Good to be here.
I always enjoy our conversations that I have with guests, both before we get started here about things. And as we were talking here today, it kind of led a little bit into the subject that we need to talk about. It is the time of the year where we really do need to kind of sit back, analyze this past year, and start to get things put together, get our year-end books ready to go for those that have January 1, which a lot of us do, January 1 start dates for our businesses. As we were joking a little bit, I said, years ago, the conversation was we had 3 sets of books. We had one for the banker, one for the accountant, and one for ourselves to really know our production costs. First of all, having multiple sets of books is just not very efficient at all. And I think the idea is that we can start to have a set of books that can give us the numbers we need to know to make good business decisions and at the same time workable for the accountant as well.
Totally. And we were also joking that one set of books is already enough to stay on top of. So 3 sets of books becomes a little bit overwhelming. And just as a refresher for folks who haven't heard of us, Ambrook is accounting software built for agriculture that keeps bookkeeping, invoicing, and bill pay all in one place. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about with producers is what do they need to know at the end of the year? And how do we want to set up their books to be able to answer those questions? And yes, taxes and your books for your accountant should sort of happen in the meantime, but you're going to be more sort of motivated to, keep up with your books if it does answer some of those questions for you in the course of doing it for your accountant and for your banker. And so being able to kind of play in both of those areas and have it be one set of books is definitely a useful way to approach your bookkeeping.
Yeah. One of the things, Paige, I think about with some of this is with where things have evolved from literally, keeping books on paper and then maybe graduating to Excel and getting somewhat computerized. There's a lot of tools in our industry that have really evolved in the last couple of years that have allowed us to integrate and keep from the redundancy of multiple entries of one. Let's say we have one transaction and eliminating that 1 to 2 times you got to enter that transaction into one time. And that's been really what I've seen in the accounting world. And I know for Ambrook, that's something you guys have really been working and focusing on quite heavily, in fact.
Yeah, definitely. I think where possible, we want to avoid you entering information in multiple places. So, good example of folks who might be, thinking about measuring their cost of production as we're heading into end of year. There's a couple different things that folks are preparing for that I hear. One is preparing their books to send to their accountant to get sort of an estimate for taxes and make sure that any, last minute decisions around prepaying for expenses or things like that get taken care of. The second lens is I want to know what it costs me to produce these things so that I can either make good marketing decisions or so that in the next year I can decide, hey, this part of my business is just not working for me. And maybe I should stop doing it, even though it's the thing I really love. And, it's something I really like to do. It's just not making me money. And, when folks are going through Ambrook, they are tagging both their income and expenses as it relates to the tax category that it belongs to. And then also thinking about their enterprise, which is the thing that we spend a lot of time upfront setting up with producers to say, what are the different parts of your business that you want to keep track of? If you're running both cow, calf, and stockers, you want to know which one of those is making you money. And so, being able to categorize both of those things at the same time makes it easier to tease out, what do I need to know for taxes at the end of the year? And what do I need to know for my own decision making? And how do I make sure that I'm doing both of those things at the same time? Another really good example is inventory. So with animals, inventory actually becomes quite complicated and important, both for taxes, but also understanding your cost of production. You're producing and growing a cow for multiple years, and you want to consider all of the expenses that went into that over the course of the lifetime of that animal. And that is actually a tricky sort of question to answer. And pair that with some complications around taxes, it becomes really, really challenging. And that's one of the things that we've been working a lot on this year is trying to build out an inventory system that answers the accounting question and helps you to calculate your cost of production.
Yeah. As we get to this time of the year, it's always imperative that we get kind of year-end stuff pulled together. From your guys' standpoint, as you're advising ranchers, not only in the software and the use that they've got, just some thoughts as far as year-end type bookkeeping, the things that they should be thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. So a few different things that folks are thinking about at the end of the year, and we generally recommend. The first is just reconciling all their accounts, making sure all their transactions are in and tagged correctly. So that just make sure that you have a good set of books to be looking at. The other piece that we recommend folks are starting to look at is two things. So for the first is where you're at with taxes. So a lot of folks are starting to talk to their accountant at this time of year to say, hey, here's what my projected income is. You want to make sure you pay as little in taxes as possible. And often a lot of the decisions that you make towards the end of the year can actually impact your tax liability. And so it's better to start looking at how much income did I make? What is my tax liability looking like? And do I need to make any adjustments heading into the end of the year, before the end of the year, like prepaying expenses or getting some of those expenses in before the end of the year, because you're, looking like you have a little bit larger of a tax liability. So we want to make sure that when you go to your accountant, you have the right questions to ask and are equipped with the right information to go prepared so that you can talk to them about what those opportunities are rather than trying to scramble to kind of get your books together. So we recommend spending some time getting your books in a good place, no matter what system you use, before taking it to your accountant so that you can spend time on that kind of strategic analysis. And then the second piece that folks are starting to think about is planning for next year. So more folks have a little bit of time in the office in the winter. And so spending some time figuring out what decisions did we make this year, what went well, what didn't go well, and what might you want to spend more time or less time on heading into the end of the year. So it's a good opportunity to think about looking at your cost per unit. So if you've got livestock, so looking at your cost per head, and just seeing where those are shaking out. Another common one that folks are looking at is, if I am producing hay and, using that to feed my animals, does it actually make sense for me to be producing that hay versus just buying it from someone else? Mm-hmm. Or should I be selling the hay to someone else because I can get a higher price there? So a lot of those types of decisions are things that you should start thinking about this time of year, and really taking a step back and saying, what's working for me, what's not, what do we need to adjust?
Yeah. And I think Paige, as you said, when you first started the answer to that question, the one thing is we know for a lot of folks in the ranching industry or ranching business, they're probably going to be fairly profitable this year for the most part. You really need to manage that, or otherwise you're going to end up paying a lot more taxes than maybe prepaying, doing some things like that you had said that your accountant can visit with you on. And I just, make sure, what we're talking about here today is not tax advice other than just there's what you need to be considering on that. I think just as we've kind of head and wrap up our conversation, the one thing I go back to, and I think it's always the thing that causes people to not keep their books current, Paige, and it goes back to almost my very first question, getting the data entered. And if we can reduce the amount of times that we have to touch that piece of information, that's going to make, and that's really at the heart of what we're getting at with some of the modern, such as what you guys have with Ambrook technology that's in the accounting software.
Totally. And I think this goes back to, obviously, if you're at this point in the year and you haven't done a lot of bookkeeping, there is going to be a little bit of catch up to do. But thinking about going into next year, thinking about what system you can build for yourself to help you stay on top of bookkeeping. So, for example, if you're making your bill payments, you should really be doing your bookkeeping as you make those bill payments. And that should be happening in real time so that you're not having to, okay, I've got this stack of bills that I need to pay. I'm going to crank through the payments there and then go back and later try to organize it and categorize it. You can think about developing a system for yourself that is, I'm going to actually pay this bill and categorize it and put it in the right place for both taxes and for my own, personal analysis to get to my cost of production. And so those are the types of workflows that we like to spend actually the most amount of time with our customers, of saying, like, what are you doing today? How can we make it so that you're actually doing the bookkeeping while you're doing some of those payment workflows? Mobile check deposit's another example. So if you're depositing a bunch of checks, you should just be sort of categorizing those transactions right as you're depositing the check, and doing a lot of those things at the same time. You'll thank yourself when you get to this time next year, and it will be a whole lot easier to do all the other things that are really the more fun stuff, to like really think about your business and spend time working on the business, rather than, doing the nitty gritty of trying to work through the books to get you those answers.
Yeah, very good. All right, Paige, real quick. I know folks, if they're interested, wanting to find out more or kind of get a trial or a look at the software, how can they do that?
Yeah, definitely would recommend folks sign up for a free trial on our website, ambrook.com. And when you do get signed up for a free trial, what we tend to recommend is, put some time in to really make sure that it's going to work for you, and really use that to the fullest extent. My team, will spend time with you to get set up in the beginning. We usually do, a 30-minute session with folks, or, we have group sessions that you can join to get started, but just making sure that you do spend the time to get it set up, because it will help you build the right system heading into the new year.
All right. Very good. Well, Paige, glad to have you here today on the program. Appreciate you joining us here.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it.
You bet. And again, that was Paige Weiler, Head of Customer Success with Ambrook, joining us here today. And like we talked about earlier in this segment, if you're wanting to do a free trial run on Ambrook, they can do that for you. If you go to their website, it's ambrook.com/ranch, ambrook.com/ranch. And I will make sure to put that link in our show notes as well. Well, stay with us. When we come back, meteorologist Don Day steps in as we take a look at our long-range weather.
It all starts with a tag. Identifying each animal allows you to better manage the entire herd and control your operation's future. For nearly 70 years, producers have chosen Allflex for individual animal management. With Allflex, you get the most trusted portfolio of ID solutions. Whether you need stock or custom visual tags, electronic tags, tissue sampling units for DNA collection, or syringes, bring the Allflex advantage to your operation today. Visit allflexusa.com to learn more.
I think it was a few weeks ago we had a guest on as we were talking about some things that we can do from our management standpoint that will help in looking ahead and the breed back on our cows. I know that seems like an awful long ways away, especially since we haven't even started calving yet. However, as we get into these cooler months and this colder winter months, part of the stress that these cattle could be dealing with is parasites. And out on the range, we know that success starts with healthy, thriving cattle. By using long-range epinomectin, an extended-release dewormer, you're going to get 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose. If you'd like to find out more about long range, you can go to their website at longrangedewormer.com. Well, joining us now is meteorologist Don Day as we take a look at our long-range weather. And Don, it's been a couple of weeks since we chatted to kind of get caught up on that, as you and I were talking before we went on air here today. Really, the parts of the country that have seen some pretty significant weather across the last couple of weeks has been a part of the country that was dry earlier this year, that being in the southwest part of the United States.
Yeah, going back to the beginning of October with the remains of Hurricane Priscilla, we've seen some really good moisture, needed moisture for California, good part of Arizona, part of Nevada, parts of southern Utah, and into New Mexico and western and southwest Colorado. It's been a wet fall in those areas, as we've seen several storm systems go along the southwest coast of California into the southwestern United States. And then we had at the beginning of November that shot of Arctic air that rolled into the eastern side of the U.S., which has left the middle part of the country, the central and northern Rockies and the central and northern plains, really with overall a very benign November so far. So on the edges of the country, the far west and southwest and the far east, there's been some active weather. But for a lot of listeners probably are saying, well, been a pretty warm, dry November so far.
Well, it's been a November and latter part of October that we've been able to get a lot of work done. So I don't see a lot of guys complaining too much about that. But as we look ahead for us, it does look, though, that as you were referring to earlier, that Arctic air, that's going to happen. And I know when we talked 2-3 weeks ago, you'd kind of predicted that as we hit that Thanksgiving timeframe, that we were going to see some significant change in the weather across the country. And it looks like that indeed is going to happen.
Yeah, it's finally going to happen. I mean, we have seen the writing on the wall for the last 2 or 3 weeks that the end of November into early December was likely going to bring about a change. And the reason for that is I'd call them structural things happening across the Northern Hemisphere in terms of the movement of cold air off Siberia into the northern polar regions of the U.S. We have an event that's called a stratospheric warming event that's developing. We saw that potentially coming at the end of the month. And that's when the stratosphere warms up in the polar regions. And what that does is it weakens the polar vortex and allows the jet stream to start to meander from the higher latitudes to the lower latitudes. We saw that with that cold snap that hit the eastern United States earlier this month. That was just kind of, I think, a dress rehearsal. Because now what we're going to see here at the end of the month into December are many opportunities for releases of cold air from the higher latitudes to the lower latitudes across not only North America, but parts of Europe. In fact, over the last week, parts of Europe and pretty far south into the Asian continent. There's been some shots of rain and snow and some freezing temperatures. So for those of you waiting for winter to get started, your wait is about over.
The next question would be, as you say, we start to see that cap come off and see this colder temperatures coming. From your projections on this, is it going to be a prolonged, or are we going to see kind of that come back a little bit into some warmer spots in December?
You usually can expect some back and forth. When you get these Arctic outbreaks, there's usually a response that will allow some warm-ups or thaws to come in. But from what we're seeing over the next 6 weeks, so this takes us actually into the first week of the new year, more often than not, any warm spell is likely going to be short-lived, and predominantly a lot of the lower 48 is going to have below average temperatures through that 6-week period. So yes, there'll be some thaws, but I think the cold snaps will be lasting longer than the warm-ups.
Okay, so how much precipitation is going to come with this? Is it just going to be cold air? Are we going to see significant snow, or probably a little snow, but what are we looking for in terms of precipitation?
Certainly with the first wave of colder weather, you do tend to have some of the opportunities for some heavier snow events. November, December storms are not particularly known for their depth of snow in terms of really piling up. But what tends to happen with these November, December storms is while they may not be the biggest snow producers like we'll get later in the year, it does bring snow that sticks on the ground, and with the long nights, the short days, the long shadows, when you start to build up snow in late November and early December, it stays. And that exacerbates the cold that comes later this month. So while we may not see big amounts of snow, the snow that we do get is going to be hanging around.
All right. Well, Don, appreciate the update. I know, like we were talking earlier, it's been a couple of weeks since we talked, so it was good to kind of catch up. Appreciate you joining us here today.
Glad to be here.
And that is meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-range weather. Now, with our weather starting to change and you want to follow along with what's going on and what he is looking at, you can follow along with him each and every morning through his daily video podcast by going to his website. You'll find the link there at dayweather.com. Today's weather brought to you by Long Range Cattle Dewormer. To find out more, you can go to their website at longrangedewormer.com.
It's more than a convention. It's where the cattle industry comes together. CattleCon 2026 is heading to downtown Nashville, February 3rd through February 5th. Gain insights from top cattle industry experts, connect with fellow producers, and take part in shaping the future of our business. Plus, world-class entertainment and inspiring keynote speakers. Whether you're there for the business, the education, or the good times, CattleCon is where it all comes together. Register today at convention.ncda.org.
Hey, if you were intrigued by our conversation on virtual fencing, we've got even more and deeper conversation next week. So be sure to join us next week on the Working Ranch Radio Show for part 2 of that conversation with Theo Beaumont of Halter and Dallas Mount with Ranch Management Consultants. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Justin Mills. Be sure to tune in next week, same time, same place. And until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.